Hello guys, welcome back once again. This part we will look at async. We continue with the sockets, but we will build a simple console application, both the client and server, using an asynchronous operation. So basically, as you may recall from the previous videos on this contest, we actually worked on synchronous, not asynchronous. So basically, we're just going to work on the asynchronous operations to draw the distinctions between the synchronous and asynchronous operations, right? So this is a little bit trivial than the previous one, but let's get it cracking. The first bit, of course, we'll build a server. An asynchronous server using sockets. So rather than just talking too much, let's get into it. So as you can see, I've got a solution and two projects. First of all, the first C# keyword, obviously that will be used as a client, and then the one that I'm just collapsing, sockets.server, will be used for the server, the socket server or service. So let's jump on straight away. First bit, of course, we create a public class. This we call it object state, and we can add a public socket. We just call it w socket, right? And we set that to null. Next bit, of course, will be a public constant integer. We call it the buffer size. We set it to 1024, and we have a public byte array. We call it the buffer. We set that, and then we pass in our buffer size. Last but not the least, we add a string builder, sp. We initialize it. So this is all we need for this class and the object state. So we go ahead and create another class. We call it it's a public class, of course. We call it an async socket listener. Now first bit, of course, we add a public static manual reset event, and we call it all completed, and we initialize it. We set an initial parameter as false, and then we add a method, of course, as public static void, and we call this start the listener. So instead of start listener class, of course, we add first bit, which is a byte array, and we can just call it bytes, whatever, and we set that to a new instance. We pass in a 1024, and the next bit, of course, will be an IP host entry, and we can say an IP host, and we can say DNS.get host entry. We pass in DNS, then we get the current host name, of course. So the next bit, of course, will be an IP address called IP, and this will be IP host, and then we pick the first element of it. The next bit, of course, will be our IP endpoint. So we just name it a local endpoint, and we just say new and then we can pass in our IP and the default port. So we just call it 4343 for the default port. So the next bit, of course, we initialize another socket and we call it a listener, and this will be a new socket, and we pass in this as our IP dot address family, and socket dot stream, we want the socket type to be streaming, and then the protocol to be TCP. So now we can try inside our application and we catch all the necessary errors that may arise. So we just print that out in the console. So the next bit, of course, here we do some work inside here. So what we would do is we say listener dot bind. So we bind the local endpoint, and we can say our listener dot listen. So we set a backlog, just set it to 100, and we just put in another while loop here just to wait for any incoming connection. So we can say all completed dot reset. You can say console.writeLine waiting for incoming connections. Then we can say are complete dot wait one. So as you can see, it's pretty straightforward stuff. So the next bit, of course, after the try catch, here what we do is we just put in a console.writeLine. We can say press enter to continue. And we can say console.readline. So the next bit, of course, would be so before the all completed wait one, in between the console.writeline, we put our listener dot begin accept. So inside here, what we do is we put a new async callback, and we name our callback accept callback, and then we pass on the listener as well. So here what we do is we create a new method to handle our callback. Call it handle our callback event. We call it accept callback. So the accept callback, here what we do is we just put some few stuff in here. So the accept callback, inside here what we do is we say all completed dot set, and we can say socket listener is equal to, we just cast it to a socket, or and then the AR dot state results async. Then what we do next is we add another socket. This one will be our handler, and this will be our listener dot and accept. So we pass our AR. So the next bit, of course, will be our object state. We can call it we just initialize it, sorry, new object state, and we can say state that WSocket is equal to our handler, and we can say handler that begin receive, so we can pass our state dot buffer 0 state dot object state dot buffer size, and we pass in our new async callback, and this one would be read. This callback will be our read callback, so we create that read callback, then we put in our state here. So what we do next is obviously we create a new read callback here. So inside our read callback, we just do put some few stuff in them. So we just remove the unimplemented exception, and we put in a string, and we call this a content, and this will set this to empty. The next bit, of course, will be our object state. This will be the state of our object, and object, we cast it object state. So we can say our AR dot async states, and we can pass our socket as our handler. Then we can say state dot WSocket, and we can say int byte read. This will be our state dot sorry, this will be our handler, sorry, handler dot and receive AR, and we can say if byte read is greater than 1, or greater than 0. This is what we do. We can say state.sb dot append. So we can say encoding dot ashe dot get string. So we pass our state dot buffer 0, then the byte read. And we can say our content is equal to state dot sb dot to string. Then we say if content dot index of EOF is a string the Arduino string comparison the Arduino is greater than 1, minus 1 actually. Then we can say CW read. Say content dot length. Bias from socket data content. And then the next bit, of course, we say send. This will be a new method that we will add. So we pass in our handler and our content. So what we do is we actually create this method called send. So we go ahead and create our method send. So here we remove the unimplemented exception, and we have our byte array here. We name it our byte data. So this will be our encoding .h to get bytes. So we pass our content, and then what we do is we say a handler that begin send. Begin send, so we can pass in our byte data 0 byte data dot length, then 0 again. Then we pass in our async callback. So async callback, and this one will be our send callback. And then we passed our handler here. So what we do is actually create this method. So here what we do is actually we just pull straight away. We just go ahead and do everything straight away. So basically we put a try catch inside here, and then we just print out the exception in the console. So what we do is we add a new socket and we call it handler. This will be, we pass it to our socket. Then we can say AR async state. So what we do is we say int byte send is equal to our handler dot end send to pass our AR. So next bit, of course, is our console with a write line, and we can say send I send to client. So the next bit, of course, we say our handler dot shutdown. So we say socket shut down both. We shut down both ends of the connection, and we can close our handler. So as you can see, they are pretty straightforward. We go back to the listen. So as you can see, after the read callback, we have this if index of here. After the if statement, we put else, and inside it we say our handler dot begin receive state dot buffer 0 object state just state that buffer size 0, and then of course new async callback. Then we say read callback. We just then we pass the state. So as you can see, this is what we've got for. So the next bit, of course, is to go to the main side and put the method here. So the next bit, of course, we say press any key to continue. Put console.readline here. Then we can actually call the method. So what we have here, call this async listener. Dot start listener. So as you can see, we just put console.readline. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run this bit here. As you can see, we've already got multiple, so I'll just make this only this to start up. So, and we run it to see what comes out of it. Most of the time, if you're actually running the project for the first time, you'll be actually prompted by the Windows firewall to allow the application to listen for incoming connection. So make sure you actually update that. So what we do is just, you see, as you can see here, we're waiting for incoming connections. As we don't have any client built, there wouldn't be any connection, and waiting is wrong, obviously, but that's not what we're actually looking for. I would just go ahead inside the code and change it straight away. Waiting for connection. So waiting for incoming connection. So as you can see, this is what we've got so far for the service part. The next bit, obviously, we work on the client and we actually put them together to see how they can communicate asynchronously with each other. So if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please make sure you subscribe to the channel, and have a lovely day. Bye bye.